Carolina?
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Fine, and you?
Can you introduce yourself
Yeah.
to
Okay.
our audience? I
Okay.
don't want to mispronounce your name, so that's why I'm asking.
No problem. So, my name is Carolina Cristofoletti. I'm Brazilian. I'm Bachelor of Laws by University of São Paulo, and I've been researching for about 4 years on child sexual abuse topics. And the core of my specialization today is child sexual abuse material, and especially dealing with crime forms that are happening on child sexual abuse material. So that's the main core of what I'm doing now.
So, how did you got into that kind of advocacy? What made you to become passionate about working for this social cause?
Yeah. So I have started researching that with University of São Paulo, where I had two founded projects about one about child sexual abuse, so the crime itself, and then I moved to child sexual abuse material, where I got also a scholarship from University of São Paulo, and I moved to Germany with also a project on child sexual abuse material, where I have reading lots of things also, so I started publishing some tests and everything. And I came back to Brazil, then went to Spain to study European legislation on that matter and everything. Came back to Brazil again, presented so the university with a thesis that was also laureated and everything. And I'm keeping researching the topics, so report channels, hotlines, so how are, for example, social media platform dealing with those issues. So CSM clubs are my main topic of research also. So this kind of thing, yeah.
All right. Uh, that's quite amazing work, Carolina. Thank you. And how does uh, this child trafficking and abuse affects different culture?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, I see the problem of child sexual abuse, it varies a lot from country to country. And for example, we have seen here also in Brazil, we have seen in Indonesia also, in India also, cases like, for example, child are being trafficked for these materials to be produced. So these are issues that somehow they come together because we are exploiting children, and sometimes there are children that are most vulnerable, for example, third world countries as it is in Brazil. So for prostitution, for sexual exploitation of any kind, and this kind of context, it leads us to also a context where production of child sexual abuse material is being favorized. So we have also seen, for example, during the pandemics, how this kind of content has increased. So I think it varies a lot. We have nowadays, for example, lots of reports regarding European countries and everything. But from my own point of view, I think that data, for example, Brazilian data remains still hidden. So there are things that come together, but the data are somehow mixed. So throughout hotlines, throughout reports, that they are there, but anyhow, they are not coming together. So because of that, we are not seeing things as clear as we should have been seeing now.
Okay, so what is the solution you think that since you work with the victims, right? Correct me if
Yeah,
I'm wrong.
yeah.
So do you work directly on the field with them, or is it like more of a data gathering and analysis and research on that and
Yeah,
working with the organizations?
yeah, I'm currently doing research about that, but there is a topic for sure about victims. For example, when we see in the pandemic context, for example, child become so more than ever online, so they are using social media platforms, and it's very important for us, for example, to think about some features that we could select, for example, to protect the children, to not allow, for example, people who are looking to groom children, who are really predators, to take contact to these children, for example, because when we have a context of very poor data protection, for example, as we have seen with some platforms. I think TikTok has had just a scandal right now about this kind of data sharing when we are talking about children users. We have also this risk that children are being put under the risk of, for example, predators locating them. So that's a very high risk condition to human traffic if we match the points in that way.
So help me understand from the context of South Americans and the rest of the world, right? How
Yeah.
we end up in this human trafficking uh, network. I mean, my understanding is like it's is it from your experience you think that like this is prevalent because of the poverty, or what are the options or choices they have? Like, why do they end up in that circle?
Yeah, I think poverty is an issue, especially when we are talking about third world countries, because, for example, in these countries, we start to see a feature where, for example, daughters are being trafficked because family needs money. And also in Brazil, this was also a case. For example, children are being exploited by their own families and everything. So, for example, child prostitution and everything. So, in order to grab some money, to gain some money for the family, and that's the point. But I don't think it is the only point, because if it was, for example, you wouldn't see this kind of cases in countries like, for example, Germany, where they have broken last year also a huge club from images of sexual abuse from children. And, for example, United States. So I think poverty is the issue, but I don't think it's the only issue. I think there are many points that are coming together, and depending on how they are matching with each other, we are seeing a different result. So I also think, from a research perspective, that when we are talking about policies against, for example, human trafficking, we need to start to think things that, of course, also globally, but we have to have this geographical dimension, because this could be crucial for we to say exactly what the needs are and how they are distributed. What are, for example, Brazil's need that can be not India's need, for example.
Yes, towards a common goal to eradicate
Yeah.
this menace, right? And what is your take on why does the law enforcement agencies or the people who are in power who has to protect the people are failing to do that? What about the role of government in enforcing strict
Yeah.
regulations and monitoring it and helping people in that? What is your take on those?
Yeah, first of all, I think that the main point is making people report that, because we see that, for example, there's many situations that are not being reported because, for example, people fear. And especially in Brazil, that's a very sensitive issue. I had the opportunity one time, I was in a school where I should talk to the students something about law and everything. And a girl came to me and said, "Thanks God that someone who is a jurist appeared here, because we have a serious problem. We have a girl here that every time that she comes to school, she's accompanied by someone that is not her dad. We don't know who this people is, who this person is. And the problem is that we know that this guy, he's exploiting this girl. And this girl, she has told her parents and everything. And the parents says, we are here on a drug traffic zone, so we cannot report that to police because we're going to be there. We cannot do that, so we have to find some way to move this communication through, to make it reach, of course, law enforcement authorities, but in a way that people don't know exactly that it was we that reported that. And also because of that, I think that a very important feature, especially when we are talking about, for example, countries where we have problems of organized crime and everything, is the possibility of reporting this kind of things in an anonymous way. So we need to create channels that doesn't make victims or friends of the victims or someone who can be identifiable to need to go to the police to report this kind of things. So we could also think, for example, about online channels. We could also think about sharing this kind of information. Where can you report? What kind of situations must be reported? So everything in a more global point of view, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the fear of getting prosecuted, and as you mentioned, right, the
Yeah.
drug cartels and other people who are forcing and endangering the life will put people to not to make complaints or take action.
Mm.
On, I want to circle back on what you said in the minutes, like so you mentioned about like the child abuse happens because of the family members, right? So how do you think like we can curtail those kind of problems? So is it related to the belief systems they have, or is it because of the economic reason the families are doing this? How do we resolve these kind of issues? Because we can't get into, unless it is a domestic violence or something like that is reported, you can't get into family matters, right?
Yeah.
So how do you like monitor the child abuse kind of thing? What are the solutions? How do we educate and bring in awareness?
For example, I see for me schools as a very important point of intervention because, for example, if there is a problem that is going on with the family, probably so the mother is not going to report the father and the children is going to remain there just like in a situation of fear where everyone is asking do not report so you're lying and everything. So I think that from the point on there's that, for example, these children have contact to an institutional scenario, for example with schools, we can have the possibility of making empowering so people who are working for schools to talk about this kind of things of crimes that can happen and that they are there for children's support so that they can trust the institution, they can tell them. So this is a kind of sensitive also, issue also because we need also to convince schools to talk about this kind of things. For example, how to be protected on the internet, how to be protected from strangers, what kind of things are not normal. For example, when predators are asking for nude pictures of children. This is not normal, but it's not an issue that we are talking, for example, in schools. So it's kind of a public policy that, in my opinion, we should develop with more strength.
Absolutely. Yeah, various factors play the role of how this happens, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
happen in silo, right? So it's all interconnected. And what do you think the pandemic and 2020, we all have put that behind, the crazy year the entire world has shattered. So how do you think that like that is going to have an impact on these issues that we are trying to address? Do you think like it has worsened the thing, or how do we face the 2021? And what are the future prospects you envision for this?
Yeah, I think the pandemic is for sure something we must talk about because, for example, for these children who had already in their homes some problem with their parents or something like that, they are remaining there the whole time with their parents and without or with very restrict possibilities of spelling that out, of talking with someone. This is an issue. The other issue is children that are more aligned than ever on social platforms. So we have to have this duty of care, for example, for setting the features, the privacy features in a manner that we are not putting our children in risk, for example. And we have also had some data, very bad data, during the lockdown, for example, that predators or people who are really consuming this kind of child sexual abuse material. They have increased the demand, so they start asking for more and more material. And my fear is that this kind of material starts to be produced also in homes where this was not still an issue. So the children that are now there the whole day and everything, they start to be exploited for giving this kind of content to the networks, because it's also a specific systematic that this kind of networks work. So for example, you need to be active, so you need to give image and everything. So if you were there, you have a children in home, so there's really a risk that these children starts being exploited for producing this kind of child sexual abuse material. So also an issue that for sure we got to map that, but we can see, so if the pandemic stand for example, for this year, so more than a year, so we have to think about that. So I think that the problem of, for example, Latino girls had always been a problem. For example, if we take a look on the statistics of adult websites, we're gonna see that, for example, this kind of things like racial things, or just like this Latino girl and everything, it keeps showing that people are really looking for this kind of things. What moves us also to a scenario where we are starting a demand from people that are also in this country. We are starting, for example, pornography industries also in this country. And really, for example, Brazil is a special case because, for example, we have sensitive also part of our culture that is sexualized music that are being played, for example, in the favelas. And we had, I think it was 3 years ago, we had a very high problem with this kind of things because it was balls that people were going there and it was sexualized music. And normally the lyrics were very violent, very sexualizing the way to say, for example, we are sexualizing a little girl and everything. And we had a problem one time with that, and Brazil has already changed the legislation just because of that, because a girl, I think she was 13 or something, she was raped by, I think it was 5 other boys that were in this ball. So we have a scenario where we are sexualizing children. We keep doing that. And it's also something we must talk about it, because somehow it impacts the way that also, for example, other countries are seeing our children, or how they are dealing with these things, for example, the Latino girl and everything. So it's a kind of thing that we have to start changing it. So from here, directly from Brazil, and moving some information, some our policies really about that, to say, oh, it's not okay to do that. Think again about what you are saying is not nice. So this kind of thing.
So let me help me understand because of the cultural difference, right? As you mentioned, Latino
Mm.
girls and so Hispanics are part of Brazilian culture, or is it like a cross-cultural? How do you identify?
As South America, I think there's something as South American culture. We can talk about that. But I think that Brazil also, for the fact of having another language, as for example, its Spanish neighbors, Spanish speakers neighbors, it has made Brazil a very particular country. Of course, it has influences of this Latin America culture as a whole. But I think that especially Brazil, there are many particularities that we can talk about. For example, we have this very cultural thing that is, for example, the funk music. So there are issues that they are, for example, crossing with another countries. But I think that there are some things that we need to see from a Brazilian perspective, because they are things that are impacting on a very different manner here, how things are happening here. Yeah. So I think Brazilian Portuguese, it has influence from, for example, also the fact that we are with Spanish-speaking neighbors, so it's very different from the language spoken in Portugal. What makes us easy to understand, for example, Spanish and everything, but the language, they are not the same. So here in Brazil, we are speaking Portuguese, and in the other countries, they are, most of them are Spanish speakers, and I think there is also one that is speaking French and another one also English. But yeah, it's a different language, what makes things a little bit more peculiar for us.
And before we finally wrap up, I think, do you have any comments or thoughts on how this impacts racism in terms of modern slavery, how it ends up as a modern slavery, and what is your final thoughts? And if you would like to.
Yeah, I think it's very important that you are inviting me to talk about that today, because it's really an issue. We must start talking about how we are sexualizing, for example, South American people, how this is impacting, for example, pornography industry, how this is impacting the kind of content that people are looking worldwide for. And also, when we start to see a market demand for this kind of content, we start to create a risk situation for example, Latin America, Black people to be trafficked into networks that are really exploitation, sexual exploitation networks. And yeah, they are kind of enslaved for this kind of industry that is, in the end of the day, a sexual industry. So it's a very important issue, and we must start talking about that, identifying this feature, and trying to move it so information forward to make real changes on these matters, because yeah, it's something that really impact us. We are not seeing that now because, as I said, data remains a little bit, so a little bit here, a little bit there. So if we bring together all these things, we start to see in a very clear manner how pornography industry, child sexual abuse, so race and gender features, they come together to the scenario that we are seeing today.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want like to dwell on the politics of it, but do you have any take on, without that, like we will not have a full circle, right? So the power politics. What is your take on the politics of your country? And also, how do you view the Americans, like United States as such? I mean, your viewpoint on America.
Yeah. So in Brazil, I think we have now a very complicated issue, because we have a president saying that lots of things that are, for example, gender-based, race-based. So it's kind of a very problematic issue if we have a leader that is telling the population this kind of things, because we are not working in the right direction to construct, for example, a country where we have respect for others' rights, where we are not tolerating this kind of sexualization, this kind of abuse, and we are not, first of all, tolerating any kind of behavior that is biased somehow. So we're not tolerating this kind of things. And I think it's very important that we start to insert also these features on politics, because it's a thing that really matters, and we need also public engagement to make things move forward with, for example, high impact actions and everything. We need to have people politically engaged on that also.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, it's been wonderful talking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I wouldn't take like much time because it's already midnight past for you. And
yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Bye.
Bye.